Okay. Yeah. So we'll see how this goes. Thanks everybody for showing up to this. This is a new thing that we haven't done before with XPT, but I thought it might be interesting. So anyways, our first guest is Raymond Carr, the one and only. For you guys who might not know who Raymond Carr is, which I can't see how you would not know who he is.
That's lots and lots of people know. Literally millions of people don't know who I am.
By the way, Raymond Carr and I have worked with each other for quite a number of years. So we know each other quite well. So we might throw some jokes back and forth at each other's expense, but it's out of love and kind of respect, right? I guess.
For the purposes of this conversation, yes.
Great. So Raymond has kind of been a staple not only in the puppet community here in Atlanta, but also the film community here. I first got to know Raymond through a piece that he did for XPT, and that was probably in 2001, maybe 2002, something like that. And that was actually my first experience at XPT. I had never heard of, I've lived in Atlanta, Georgia all my life, and I never heard of the Center for Puppetry Arts or XPT. Of course, I grew up in kind of the Norcross area. I had been to the Fox Theater, but for some reason I had never heard of the Center for Puppetry Arts. Anyways, a friend of mine found out about this thing called experimental puppetry theater and was like, hey, you want to go check this out? It's like, yeah, great, let's go do it. And beyond seeing the Muppets when I was growing up back in the 70s, and then seeing Being John Malkovich around the same time that we went to see this, were kind of my only exposure to puppetry. I had been a Atlanta actor around town for, I don't know, a good 15 years at this point and stuff like that. Never really thought much about puppetry until I actually went to see XPT. And one of the pieces that really stuck with me was Raymond Carr's piece, which we can kind of talk about what that piece was about if you want to at some point.
I really don't remember which piece you're talking about, so this would help me jog my memory.
Oh, really? So it's the one that was based on, I believe it was a Christian band. It was an instrumental piece, and it was the one where you were it's basically you, I believe, in your apartment, and you're talking to your furniture pieces.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. But to kind of catch you up from there, because that was a while back. Like I said, Raymond's not just a staple in the puppet community, but also in the film community. He himself has produced his own films, including Hittori, Wild as the Wind, Bait, and most recently, Joyriders. He has also worked on Lazy Town, which some of you guys might know, especially if you're younger. Earth and Ned, a recent thing that's on Disney Plus. Walking with the Dinosaurs, which is, if any of you guys have any younger siblings, you might have taken them to that show before. And also Splash and Bubbles. And that's a PBS show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And you most recently started working with the Henson Group with not only Splash and Bubbles, but also doing the Puppet Up live show, which is the adult improv show, right?
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, that should kind of catch you up with Raymond Carr. Is there anything you want to kind of talk about? Because I feel like most people had a really bad pandemic, I feel like you had a great one. Things really started looking up to you, especially once the Hensons got their claws into you. You really started keeping busy with them.
I mean, look, don't believe the hype. Social media is a lie. So I was out there struggling. Look, I'm incredibly grateful for the opportunities that I have had, and I don't want to diminish anything that people have done for me. Yeah, I mean, there was plenty of struggle out there. I did have an opportunity to do a couple of cool things, but it's also weird because like the way that these things get released, they get released at certain chunks of time. So I like was posting about a bunch of stuff that just happened. That seems like it just happened, but it happened like a year and a half ago or something like that, and it's just all getting released. But yeah. So thanks. I guess is that the introduction? Actually.
Yeah, it was kind of a weird introduction and listing
No.
off some of your
All right.
credentials.
Yeah. So hey everybody. Thanks for coming out. I see you recognize some of y'all. It's good to see I've worked with some of y'all before, and I'm excited that you're doing XPT kind of again this year. So for me, I started doing XPT back in 99 was my first XPT. I was 17 at the time, and Bobby Box, who was a producer at the Center for Puppetry Arts, he kind of was a mentor for me, and he was like basically snuck me into XPT because it's an 18 and up show. He's like, all right, you got to check this out. And so I saw it and completely rewired my brain. I still remember some of the pieces that happened in those, including Kevin. That was where I met Kevin Huey, known as Shitty Bedford, and seeing some of his amazing work. And I immediately was like, I gotta do this. I gotta do this. And so fortunately, the next XPT was right after my 18th birthday. So I applied and went through the whole process as a 17-year-old, and then like was on stage by the time I was 18. So it was kosher. That was back when they were doing XPT more than like 2 times a year. They also did a thing called XP Terror, which was their Halloween show, which was a weird thing. So
can I stop you for a second?
Yeah, please.
So just to get a little background on you, so I think most people, especially going to see XPT for the first time, you might have that kind of feeling like, oh, maybe I can do this. This might be cool and stuff like that. But because of how you grew up, it was maybe a little easier for you to conceive of the idea of putting on your own show. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's a lot of crazy shit that I did when I was younger that I have no idea how I did it or why, like how I had the balls to do that shit. So for all of you younger people, definitely take advantage of your own ambition while you can before the weight of the world gets into your brain and tells you can't. But yeah, I grew up in the church, despite my foul language right now, and doing shows for kids with my parents. And my parents did clowning, and my brother and I did puppetry in the church. It was kind of like hanging out behind the puppet stage and singing songs with our puppets, Christian songs and what have you. So I still had terrible stage fright. And so this wasn't an easy thing for me to do in hindsight. But fortunately, my best friend in high school wrote this crazy short story about a little baby that was the cutest baby in the world and became jealous of food because people liked food more than the baby. And so he went around telling everybody to eat me, wanting them to literally eat the baby, because the baby was like, if you just had a taste of me, you would love me as much as you love food. And it basically drove the baby insane. And it tried to cook itself, and eventually was medicated. And then eventually the baby ate itself. And this was a short story that my best friend wrote in this in our Christian homeschool group, and was almost kicked out because it was so bizarre. And I immediately gravitated to that and was like, that is brilliant. I need to do this. So that was the thing that I did. And it was very simple. It was a Muppet style puppet with basically a church puppet that I just added legs to, and I put it into like a baby onesie, and it was full body, and I had a black outfit on, and I was basically performing it behind a high chair and on the ground and everything. Very, very simple. There was like only 2 or 3 set pieces. There was an oven that turned into a shadow. It had like a shadow screen on the side that the baby could jump into. And it was mostly just about going through the script and articulating the beats of it. There wasn't a whole lot of creativity and scene transitions or other different elements to it. It was very, very simple, but the basic story was interesting enough to where I felt confident in that. So that was my first XPT. And then
So was that, so I know you made that in, that's the Baby Eats Me, is that what it was called?
Baby Says Eat Me, yeah.
So Said Eat Me. So I saw that as a film. So did you do that live or did you do it as a film for XPT?
So I did it as a live. It was a live performance, and then a year or 2 later, this is back when like film cameras were starting to really become easily accessible to the public. Like GL1 was the big camera and everything. And I was going to Georgia State at the time in the film department, and so we rented a camera, and I basically, in a very simple way, we found an interesting apartment that my friend had, and with cool, colorful walls, and we basically shot the beats of the XPT for that, and that's what exists. I guess there is probably a VHS of the original performance of XPT that I did, but it's somewhere in the deep archives of the library at the center. But after that, my next XPT was with Bobby Box. He had me assist him on a short XPT that he did for XP Terror. And it was very, very simple. It was just a dog that was made out of 2 mops, like a floppy dog, and just running around this graveyard. And it found a ghost, and this ghost was harassing him. And he ate the ghost and then farted the ghost out. And it just ate the ghost and farted the ghost out. And it was set to music. And it was just like running around, eating the ghost and farting it out. And that was pretty much it. It was a lot of fun. But it's very contrasting because I generally have very, when I first started off, I thought that it needed to be like a very linear thing. And this is what I like working with Wade, is because Wade is not a traditionally linear, he's not held to linear storytelling. So I oftentimes feel like I need like beginning, middle, and end, and then Wade comes in and just like brings in his own chaos, and we can try and make it more abstract. You usually push me more towards the abstract, or at least a non-traditional like linear storytelling. So I felt like that original XPT was a success because we ended up taking it to different venues. We did Music Midtown, which was a mess. Don't do XPTs at Music Midtown.
Was that thing that the center put on where
Yes.
they had a bunch of XPT participants doing that?
Yes, it was myself, Kevin Huey, who has done many XPTs as well, and his stuff is weirder than mine. And then Scott Warren and Ryan Dunn, who did this short piece about shoes. It was really brilliant. It was all these shoes in line trying to get into Star Wars. That's what it was. And you just saw it from the perspective of the shoes, and just all these conversations. And it was a lot of fun, but it was at a music festival in Midtown Atlanta and did not make any sense for it being there.
What was that like? I mean, did you even have anybody in front of the stage to even watch it? And if so, were you able to keep them there to actually watch it? Or did you just see people start like veering off like, I don't get this, I'm just leaving and trying to find the next band?
So it was basically like a platform, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 feet long, like you would have at a band. I think there was like a folk band playing before us. And our XPTs were chosen because they were very mobile. You didn't need a whole lot of stuff for it. And Bobby was like, is adults only, adult puppetry, adult everything. And of course, there were still like lines of children sitting in front of the platform. And so Bobby was like, before the show, he was like, look, you got to come out hot. this is there. We told them over and over again, but they got to know. And so they had Ryan Dunn and Scott Warren's piece, and the first thing he did was the character just yelled out, "Fuck!" as loud as he could, just to let everybody know this is the kind of show you're getting into.
Right.
But yeah, it was a mess. I mean, we had a good time, but it was not a good idea. And that was the first and last time we did that.
Center was never asked back again.
Nor did we want to go back, quite frankly. I don't know whose choice that was, but it was, I think it was mutual.
Right.
We did a couple of other smaller things at art galleries and stuff like that too. That was a lot of fun. But but in regards to like what my art, I think I've done 10 XPTs. I think I've done 12 XPTs, 8 I've directed, and then 4 others that I've participated in that. So, and I may be wrong on that number, but somewhere around that.
And you also helped out Michael Haverty too.
Yes.
During his tenure of directing XPT. So you were helping him out being the assistant director for those.
Yes, that is correct. So from the Baby Says Eat Me, what was really interesting was just being able to interact with the other artists who were obviously older than me and had a better sense of story. And then also those who had like a very antagonistic relationship with story, like Kevin Huey. His mantra was make a show like you're playing a practical joke on the audience. And if you've ever seen his pieces, it's definitely that. It is taxing, it is difficult, and sometimes painful, but it was a type of thing that was just at the level of absurd that I just loved it. And those of us who did love it were really leaned into it. And those of us that didn't love it were just wanted to run away from it. So there's a lot of different perspectives on that. The next piece I did was a little bit more narrative. Oh, that's right. What I ended up discovering was that people were putting a lot of emphasis on what they thought the piece meant. Like Baby Says Eat Me was pretty straightforward. The next piece was more abstract. And then what I did was with the piece that Wade saw, which was too long, was I was interested because the abstract piece that I did, I had a very clear vision of what it meant, but everybody got like way different perspectives on what that meant. And so that got me into thinking of like, I want to make a piece that means nothing to me, but has these nuggets of what could be meaning to other people, and see how the audience actually gets. Basically making a Rorschach piece. And that's what the piece that Wade first saw was. And it was a one-person show. And I was also trying to make a piece that was just one person. Every XPT I did up until this point, I always went in thinking that I wanted to do a one-person piece, just because I had a hard time of articulating it to other people of what my vision was, just because I wasn't a good director or wasn't a director at all. So it's just, but eventually I just needed, all right, I just need one more person to like hold this. I just need one more person to do this thing. And so the piece that Wade saw was basically the culmination of me being able to just do a one-man show. The basic premise of it was a guy in an apartment, and it was a Czech style marionette, which is basically a rod coming from the puppet to a marionette control. And that gives you more control from the puppet. So it's not just a marionette that's just wiggling around. And in the apartment, there was a TV, a lampshade, a couch, and a dresser. And they all had wires coming down to the bottom through the stage. And I was just pushing on foot pedals that would make the different pieces of furniture articulate in different ways. Like the lamp would bounce up and down, the TV would kind of open like a flower, the bookshelf would split apart, the couch was like Cherry from Pee Wee Herman, but it was all my voice. And the conversation was, the furniture was trying to get the guy to go out, just get out of the house, do something, get over it, move on. And the guy who was talking was like, well, you don't know what I'm dealing with. You don't know me. Like I'm just doing what I need to survive. And like, it was this conversation of like, stay or go, getting over trauma, getting over something, getting over a relationship, but it was all through my voice. Talking at, like, I didn't modify my voice at all for each individual characters or him. So it all sounded like this, it was all coming from me. So that
Well,
was a lot.
let me ask you
Yeah.
about that real fast.
Uh-huh.
So building that set, it's still probably one of my favorite puppet pieces by you.
I peaked 20 years ago. All right.
You peaked 20 years ago, exactly, and just haven't been the same since. But I think what was so interesting about it was the fact that you weren't necessarily hiding the fact that you were the only person working on the show. I like kind of being able to see some of the manipulation. You couldn't see all of it, but you could kind of tell. We as the audience, you could at least tell that you were in control of everything, and I kind of like that about it. And I think it suited the piece really well. Now, in saying that, was that the first time you had ever built anything like that for yourself? Because since you had that kind of past history with working with your parents on certain puppetry stuff, which was more kind of Muppet style puppetry, is it correct? Or am I
Yeah,
wrong about
yeah.
that?
It was very, very simple Muppet style puppetry.
So how did you go about learning how to do this for yourself? About making this set and all these pieces that maybe it was the first time you've made anything that operated like that before?
Yeah, it was it was definitely just a matter of practicality. I knew that I wanted these puppets to be controlled by me. And so the only logical idea for me was that they would all have strings on them. And I knew basically, I start from the initial idea. The idea is that I want these puppets to all be controlled by me. How do I do that? The easiest way is to direct control by having something triggering the movement that this puppet can do, basic movement. The easiest thing for most of those was just a piece of string. So once I had that concept of like, I want this character to talk, it doesn't have to walk away around, it just needs to talk. So piece of string going from one. Some of them had a piece of dowel. So it was, I connected them all to foot pedals. So it would be a pull system or a push system for each one of these little things that they needed to do. So for me, it's all about starting with an image and then breaking down the base to the base of what that image needs to do. It's almost like sculpture for me, where I start with a big idea and I want it to do a lot of different things. And then I start whittling it down to what's the necessary thing for it to do? What's the most needed element of this character? And then I strip away everything else. Because then if you just think about the most necessary thing, then you can really start to accentuate that element and not have to worry about, this character doesn't need arms and like frilling around and all that kind of stuff, because that's not important for this character. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to add arms onto this character and worry about how the arms are going to be used. It's just the simplicity. And that's what's great about XPT. And I would say the thing that I push towards and most of my pieces up until this point was simplicity. Because at the end of the day, it's a puppet show and people are there to see these puppets come to life, and you don't need a whole lot to make them come to life. I will say, once I accomplished that though, I went to the opposite spectrum, which I did. I met Wade, and he was nice enough to say that he liked my stuff. And so I was like, cool, let's do the biggest XPT I can think of, which I think I might be getting this wrong chronologically. I think it may have done Vertical Man, Horizontal Woman first, and then I did the David and Goliath piece.
That's correct.
Yeah. So those are two big pieces though. So I'll just go about this. So David and Goliath was a piece that I wanted to do as kind of a reaction to going really small. I wanted to go really big. So it was David versus Goliath, the story of Bushido. So it was the story of David and Goliath set in feudal samurai Japan. And it was supposed to be almost like anime slash 70s samurai films. So it was very dramatic, very stark movements, and it was all full body blacklight puppets where they could jump up into the air and freeze and then slice each other. It was also inspired by Bunraku theater and Kabuki theater as well. And they would slice each other and a ribbon would come out with blood. And then we built a 10-foot tall dragon that was operated by 4 or 5 people that was supposed to be Goliath. So, and we would do these big transitions where David would come up and then Goliath would jump up and his wings would spread and they would freeze. And then Goliath would just swoop past David and they would come to a standstill there. So it was intercut with the fight of David and Goliath and a small mini arc of David's journey to become king. So it was like intercut with all this kind of stuff. So it was very, very complicated. And this is all like 10-minute long piece that was very intense.
Wasn't there a marriage at the end or something like that?
Yeah, because like he had a love interest in there too. Oh, and then King Saul. This was also, it was right. It was culminating with the final battle of King Saul. His rival, his enemy, was trying to hunt him down, and then Saul does Bushido, where he slices his stomach. And then I heard a story about like one of the final accounts of this ritual suicide of Bushido, where you slice your stomach and then you have somebody cut your head off, and you try and slice your stomach off open as far as you can, and then when you stop, somebody slices your head off. And so, but one of the last ones recorded of Bushido, which was like in the 70s, the guy couldn't get through his head on the first try. So it took like multiple tries. So I tried to recreate that too, where I had the guy cutting the head off and he was just like hacking it away.
Oh, I remember that.
Yeah. So in that space, that was a very, it was a traditional linear story, but it was also like in a cinematic way. I was trying to recreate visuals that were harkened to cinema. I generally try and have a goal with my piece outside of just telling a story. Like, what am I trying? The experiment. That's the thing. It's like, obviously, XPT is an experiment for some people if they've never done puppetry. But I always encourage people, even if you've never done puppetry, don't just let it be an experiment for you. And it's like, oh, my experience is that I've never done puppetry. Try and have it be an experiment for puppetry, you know? Even if it is something that, I mean, obviously there have been other theater pieces that have tried to recreate cinematic experiences, but there's a lot of different ways you can do that. So that was my experiment with that piece. My piece with Too Long was trying to do a one-man show. The piece that I did after that was called Vertical Man Loves Horizontal Woman. And it was this background that was all black and white stripes. All the puppets were black and white stripes. And the furniture was black and white stripes as well. And when the background was horizontal black and white stripes and the puppet was vertical black and white stripes, and you could actually see them. But once the background changed to the opposite, you know, horizontal versus vertical, what was there before becomes invisible again. And so the woman is horizontal stripes and the man is vertical stripes, and they can't see each other because the background keeps changing.
I always felt that was your kind of your most cinematic piece. Going from Too Long into the David and Goliath story, big jump in sizing of puppets for sure. And I guess one thing that I don't think was quite answered yet, and I want to dig in a little deeper, is like, how did you figure it out? Were there people that you went to and asked certain questions if you didn't know how to do something, or did you go to YouTube and look stuff up, or online and looked up stuff? Because it
Yeah,
really, like, Goliath was what, 6x4 or something like that.
yeah, it was a very large puppet. I think that part of what I do is I'm a student of obviously puppetry, um, and I see a lot of theater and everything. And when I am in a creative mindset, I am always in the process of um, just thinking about how something can be different or how it can be. I'm always inspired by uh, what I'm watching, and for me, it's just about collage work. I always just consider my art as collage because it's never just wholly from me. It's always like ideas that I'm taking from different people. So I can point to a dozen different styles of puppetry and puppet shows that I've seen that would put together David and Goliath. You know, so I think that the first step is just to consuming this information, consuming all kinds of theater and television, whatever, with the mindset of I am going to mentally take notes. I still do this. On my phone, I have little notepads of just like ideas. I have a whole folder on my computer of just like images that I see, screen grabs, you know, just thoughts that I based on different shows that I watch. Sometimes I'll use my phone to just take pictures of stuff, and knowing that like I may never get used, but just practicing, just being aware of your surroundings and being aware of the creative habit of discovery is incredibly important. And from there, I think it goes back to the basic ideas of what does this thing need to do. So for like the Goliath dragon, I should have pulled up an image. I'll see if I can find it. If I can't find it now, I'll send some images to you later, Wade.
Sure.
But it was a dragon, so I know this dragon needs to be big, and know it needs to be it needs to move. I'm not going to be able to use marionettes because we don't have those resources at the center. It needs to move in and out quickly, so I'm just going to use rod puppet. It's going to be a rod puppet, just a giant rod puppet that we just put rods on and make it move. Then the question is, how many people do I need to make it move? And what's the minimum amount of people I can to make this puppet move? And so it's these processes of eliminations. And I tell you, like the way that it operated, if you looked up close, it was a mess. Zip ties, hot glue, like chicken wire, all that stuff. But it moved. And that's all I really needed in that moment. And that's all XPT required of me in that moment. So I think it's a matter of just simplifying as much as possible, and seeing what the puppet needs to do is the biggest thing for me.
I think that's one of the great things about XPT. I don't know how many times where someone who is not a professional puppeteer or professional builder is involved with XPT. They build something, and then one of the builders at the center comes by and happens to look at it or something like that. I'm like, how did you do that? And even they see this new way that is not the proper or right way to make this type of puppet. They see how someone else kind of just scrapped it together and is like, oh, that's interesting. And then, the actual puppet builder can then say, oh, well, this is how we normally do it and stuff like that. But, if that works for you, that's great. But it's the exchanging of ideas between the person who's just kind of junking together sometimes, not all the time, and the person who has a lot of knowledge on how to properly build a puppet and the right materials to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is, in contrast, I think that thinking about movement is very important, especially if you're an artist that has mostly done like sculpture or painting or something like that, you have to think about movement so much. And because of that, you'll start doing this process of elimination. Yeah, it can look really cool, but if it can't move, then it's just a sculpture. I found an image of the dragon from David and Goliath. I'm going to upload it into the chat here. You kids can see it. So yeah, I think that movement is a really important element of all of these puppet builds. So that's something I would encourage you to do, just to, when you think about. So I think that, can you see that image I just uploaded in the chat?
I'll look right now since everyone else has their.
Actually, you know what? Can I share my screen? Let's see if I can share my screen.
I might have to.
Oh, maybe not.
Give you permission. Hold a second. You can now, or you should be able to now.
Okay, that's great. Let me do this because I just found these images. All right. So this was the Goliath puppet. You see that?
Yep.
So it's very, very simple. This is without any black lights on it. This is with the black lights on it. And you can see it's it's more dynamic in this space. Another image of it with the black light. Yeah. These are some of the other puppets. This is funny. So this is after Vertical Man, because a person that I performed with a lot, Alia Turner, she had this idea that I guess she read somewhere that you can build puppet heads with laundry lint. And so she had just been saving all the laundry lint from her dryer for like a year or two. And with the thought that one day she would make a puppet head out of that. So these puppet heads are actually made out of laundry lint and white glue.
Oh, so they weren't foam. Interesting.
Yeah, but they're super light. So she just like put them all together. She like spread it. There was like a foam egg in the middle of it, and she just like matted it all together, and I think shaved it down into her, and then just painted it. Super light. They're very durable. They're still in my shop today. Huh. So you can see that this is like, it's probably hard to see how large this puppet is in this context, but they're all the human puppets are about that big, and the dragon is much bigger than that. So, all right, I'll stop sharing. So that's the other thing, like having partnerships. That was the one thing that the solo piece wasn't allowing me, was having the partnerships that enabled the David and Goliath piece to be so much more dynamic. Just having people around me that we could spitball our ideas around and everything was a lot of fun. And I was able to get people together just by like, I had a pretty clear vision on what I was trying to accomplish. And from there, we all kind of worked together to actually accomplish it. So I think if you can have a vision of what you want to do, even if it doesn't end up being the final version, you can still inspire people to want to help you with all of that. So
going on to specifically like writing for puppetry, I think there is that I feel like it's a center quote from Jason Hines about that puppets should not talk. That's boring to like the most.
There's nothing more boring than watching two puppets talk to each other.
That's it. Yeah. And I get where that comes from. I obviously understand where that comes from. And I find it interesting with your pieces, especially as you kind of moved into film. It seems like, well, for one, in most of the films, I believe, I could be wrong about this, except for maybe Hattori, there's always a human actor there for the puppet kind of work against. And usually the puppet is not talking. Usually it's kind of a voiceover. Is that correct? Or
it's interesting. My films, Yes, I will say that most of my films are the puppets are companions to the
Hmm.
people.
Hmm.
Um, they're not the main characters in my films. And it's funny. Wade always has this great way of like calling me out on stuff that I don't notice about myself. So I don't know if I actually put that together. Um, I will say that part of it is just when you have a puppet performing next to a human um, in cinema, it's a little bit of a harder sell if it's not because it can't emote. So let me take a step back. At the end of the day, I always ask, and I encourage other people to ask, why is this a puppet show? Is this just? I mean, if it's, and that's the reason I think that like just having two puppets talk to each other, it's like, why is this a puppet show then? It could be anything. What I love about puppetry is that it feels like you can do anything. So why just have them sit and talk to each other? Unless, I
Hmm.
mean, you can just say that like, yeah, it's so that they can talk about topics that humans couldn't talk about in like politics or whatever, and be accepted in that sense. And there's truth to that. But for me personally, at its height, and specifically with XPT, and the XPTs that have been the most successful to me that I've seen has been this piece couldn't have been done any other way except with puppetry. And that is extraordinary to me that we have this art form that is just like that. So and in regards to like why I added these puppets as like a companion as opposed to the star of these puppets is because I would say probably just because that these characters needed some sort of, they're usually a metaphor for something else, or they're usually a way for these characters to filter ideas or thoughts or conflicts that they've been dealing with through these additional characters that are puppets and what have you. And it's ultimately the journey, the emotional journey of the main characters that we're focusing on, and these puppets are going along for the ride. Um, you know, and so yeah, that's the basic answer to that. But I do
Yeah.
think that in regards to writing, I think that asking yourself why is this a puppet show is the most important thing.
Where do you seem to start off with your writing process? I think you mentioned before that you usually get a visual in your head. Is that where it starts from? And does it for you, and maybe this has changed for you as you've kind of branched out into filmmaking, um, do you automatically start with the idea that most likely puppetry is going to be involved in somehow, or are you now kind of so far away from it with the filming that you don't necessarily have to go there anymore?
I certainly don't have to.
Yeah.
I think that I do. Part of there is a little bit of a not fully artistic way of thinking about it, and part of it is just that adding puppetry to film is a way that I set myself apart from other filmmakers. You know, I'm not going to make a mumblecore film about a guy in his 20s trying to debate whether or not to go to college, because that's just not interesting to me, and it's been done a million times. And why? You know, I'm going to make something with some sort of fantastical element that other filmmakers can't do, because I know now through, honestly, through XPT and some of the other things that I've done, I can build things, and I have resources with other artists who can build things that other filmmakers can't do. So might as well lean into that as opposed to just having a straightforward cinematic experience. I do. This is what I've been doing for my life, and I still love it. So um, it's funny you were talking about like having the main character. Wade and I did an XPT together, a film together um, called Monster Guard, and I don't remember what year that was. Actually, I have the guy right here. So this was the main character in a film that we made, and it had a lot of different mediums in it. And I really don't remember how that started, Wade. Do you?
Like the idea for the story?
Yeah.
The idea for the story. Yeah.
Here, I'll describe it, and then you can tell me if you remember.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a short film about this guy. He lives in like a frozen tundra and like a cabin by himself, and he has a barn outside, and in the barn there's this monster that he keeps caged up. And inside the cabin, he lives a very sedentary life. He only has like beans that he eats out of a can, and he just goes to the oh, and he also, you could tell that he used to drink. There's some sort of indication that he used to be an alcoholic of some sort. And he goes to the barn to like feed the monster, and he comes back every day. It's like a very routine day. And at one point there's a big storm, and he gets locked in, and he starts drinking, and he goes out and accidentally lets the monster out. And he tries to get away, and he crashes his car into a tree, and the monster escapes into the city, and that's pretty much it. And it was kind of this like quasi metaphor for his own demons, his alcoholism, what have you. But what it was great about it was we had like 3 or 4 different styles of animation and live action. So whenever we had a close-up of this guy looking around, we went into Wade's eyes, like this close. The camera was this close to Wade's eyes, just like looking around like that. And then when he was inside of his cabin, the aesthetic of the cabin was all chalk. So Wade's wife has this big wall that's all chalk paint, and we had an artist come in and make this set piece of this interior of this cabin that was all drawn in chalk. And so like he was getting like a can of beans, and so his hand would go up, close up his hand, and then you see like a can of beans like disappear from the chalk outline or whatever. And then when he was outside, the set was snowy, so it was like cotton on the ground. And these 2 set pieces, actually I have one here too. Set pieces that I built out of balsa wood, and I just stained this balsa wood, so it's very simple design on that. And then we had like a toy truck that was his truck, and we shot it, some of it on green screen, some of it practical, and then I just because it was green screen, I was able to adjust the size for different things and make him look like he could fit inside of the car or going inside of the cabin and all that kind of stuff. And then we use like little tiny ornament houses as like at the city, and we just like put a bunch of those up against this white backdrop. But yeah, do you remember, Wade, how that started?
Yeah, I don't. I don't remember how we got onto that storyline.
I feel like it was your idea, and then that was the initial thing. But yeah, I think that for me, writing for XPT is the simplification. And those of you who are, I guess, what do you got, like about 6 weeks left? Somewhere
yeah, a little bit more, but yeah.
Okay. You're in the space now where, as I talked about sculpting a piece, like you start on with a block of marble and you're just like whittling it down. You should be in the whittling it down phase, definitely, because talk about XPTs that work or don't work. Some of the ones that don't work the most are the ones that are just piling on so much, that feel overcrowded, that have too much dialogue, especially if your show does have a lot of dialogue and you may think it's the funniest stuff in the world, like edit. And especially, and then that kind of might be a little weird because Wade is like, do we have enough time for this whole showcase? But like, if your piece is 10 minutes, really think about what it might look like as a 7 to 5 minute piece. like, and be brutal in that space, because you may surprise yourself at that you can tell the story in half the time. And that's the problem of saying that what is experimental to me about XPT is that I'm experimenting with puppetry. There is still such a thing as a puppet show, even if you're experiencing it, and even if you don't have a lot of experience with that, that is still too long. Bo says, too short to suck. And that's more of like the puppet slam space, but it's definitely true in the XPT too. Even if it is like extremely abstract, extremely like just avant-garde and all that kind of stuff, you can definitely lose a lot of your piece. All of you, very likely.
Yeah, you really can. I find it interesting because you kind of working in both worlds, both the film and puppetry world, because I find that film is more akin to a photograph. It's a statement in time, and it's very factual. Where to me, puppetry is closer to like an expressionist painting.
Right.
It represents the world, but it distorts it.
Yeah, I would always tell my friends that were going to see XPT for the first time, I'd be like, they think of this more as a poem than a play, these pieces. Especially if you're not used to watching abstract theater or avant-garde theater and what have you. Because oftentimes people who don't watch that kind of stuff, they're trying to find the story in the piece. And then they get out and be like, well, I didn't understand it. I was like, well, there was nothing to understand outside of what you put into it. Like, so yeah, I think that is like, but that being said, even if you are just making a piece of poetry, you can still edit within that space. So I would highly recommend everybody just taking a hard look at what you're doing and seeing where you can cut.
Yeah, no, that's good. Final question before we go on to questions, because I think I've had you about an hour now. Why, and this is a very general kind of cheesy question, but I'm going to ask it anyways, because you've just been involved for so long. Why do you think a showcase like XPT is important? What did you gain from it?
I'll tell you, it is extremely important, and I hope that it goes on forever. And I always tell people, that are trying to get involved with anything, I always still hype XPT. I think XPT is the most important thing about XPT is the X, is the experiment. And I think that if you are truly trying to experiment, it's an exciting and incredible space to be in. And that's the thing about experiments. Sometimes experiments fail. I have pieces that I've done in XPT where people may have enjoyed it and they may have liked what they saw, but for me, that it was a failed experiment. And that doesn't mean that and the idea of having a failed experiment as being this detrimental, horrible thing, I don't see it that way. I think that experiments are designed to have successes or failures. And because you may have a failure in one space or another, doesn't mean that you shouldn't experiment more. So having the space to experiment and also having an audience, like Wade and I know after we went into XPT and started doing our own stuff, getting an audience is not a given, especially for the crazy shit we do. So having a guaranteed audience is just as valuable, if not more valuable than anything else that XPT is going to give you. And that preview night, you guys are still doing the preview night?
Yes.
Okay. That preview night is gold. Yeah, if you have time and if your piece can make adjustments, use that preview night to do that. Like make as many tiny adjustments as you can to for that to make it really pop on that opening night. Don't just build up into the preview night and then say I'm done, and then you just continue the same piece. Try and use that preview night for what it's supposed to be. And I realize that that's not always the case, because you get out of the theater at like 11 or midnight, and then you might have to go to work the next day or what have you. But maybe there's some element in your piece where you're like, all right, I want to keep this element in, but it may be too long, but I'll keep it in for preview. And then after that, I'm going to just cut it. So just think about it in that context, because having an audience will help you understand what is working and what is not. Obviously, it's a little harder for dramas or something more abstract or what have you, but yeah, really utilize. And also, like, you can change throughout the entire XPT. From Thursday to Sunday, your piece might start to look different, and that's exciting. That's a part of the experiment. So try not to get too rigid about the process at any time, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's a really good thing to put out there, because that preview night is probably going to be, it won't be the loudest audience,
Yeah.
but it's probably going to be your best audience. That's where the people that work at the center are going to be there. They're going to laugh. They're basically in your corner cheering you on. They want everyone to do an awesome job.
And they've also, a lot of them have seen XPT before, so they're not coming in there being like, what the hell is this crap?
Yep.
They're gonna have that mindset of, they're gonna be responsive. They're gonna be very responsive.
Yeah. And that's the one thing that I kind of want to really push, definitely this year, and if I do another year or something like that, is the idea that obviously XPT is a show. People are paying money to come see the show, so you obviously want to put your best foot forward with your piece, but it is okay to fail. And I also like the idea of XPT, instead of looking at as a show, looking at more as a workshop that is being shown. Raymond will know about this just because we worked at the same theater together, but that's how Push always ran their shows. It was always a workshop. In fact, they had a German word that was painted up on the balcony. I forgot what that word was, but it basically meant workshop. And that's how that theater was kind of run. They wanted to put on thought-provoking, interesting shows that you weren't going to see in any other Atlanta theater. And that meant sometimes it's not going to be a great show, or it might fail. But I don't think failure is like one of those things like, in school we think about failure in the sense that either you get an A or you get an F. Even in those pieces that don't work out the best, there's usually a nugget there. There's still the idea that people can kind of clam onto, even if your piece necessarily is not the audience's favorite piece. There's usually still something you can glean from any piece that's actually performed.
And that's what it's also piggybacking on that. Like, failure for me isn't just that nobody laughed or people thought it wasn't good or whatever. For me, it's sometimes like everybody loved it, but I was trying to do something specific. And what I did was not accomplished through that piece, or I was trying to communicate something specific. And so for me, that is a failure. And that's not necessarily a failure in the context of I'm hating on myself or whatever, but I am acknowledging the fact that I set out to do something. I didn't do it. And so therefore, was it a failure? So therefore, let me think about how to communicate. If my goal was to communicate an idea, let me figure out how to communicate an idea in the future in a different way.
Yeah, great. That's awesome. So we're at 8 o'clock, 8:03 actually. So if anybody has any questions, you can take the don't speak mic off and ask your question. But if you don't, that's fine as well.
I
I have a question.
Yes.
So I thought it was really interesting, the idea, asking yourself why puppetry. And I almost think like maybe even Tim asked me that a couple of years ago. And initially when you said it, I was like, yeah, totally. But then I thought about it more and I was like, well, cinema can do a lot, animation can do a lot. So I'd love just to hear some more thoughts from you about what it means. Like, yes, this piece could not have been, like, puppetry was what was needed.
I will say this, that question, the answer being this can only be done with puppetry is rarely achieved, because I think that there are other pieces. In fact, I would say that the only piece that I have ever done where I can honestly say this could only be done with puppetry was Hitori. And Hitori, it's funny, I found the link to the too long piece, Wade. I'll drop it in the, maybe I'll send it to you via email. Okay. It's on my old YouTube channel, whatever. But Hitori is a piece that is about this puppet that's in this world that's all puppeteers. Like the ground, the floor, the sky, the water is all puppeteers in black. And the puppet is white.
Do you have a shot of that so you can kind of show like the shot of the bodies with the white puppet?
Yeah, I can find it. Yeah, this is the teaser for it. I'll drop it in the chat as well. So actually, let me just, I'll screen grab. I'll just share it. The screen share, okay. And I'll turn the music down for maybe like that.
Yeah, so what's great about this and what everyone's seeing there is the fact that you're actually, the puppeteers are the set themselves. And that's why you're saying that that one could not have been done any other way.
Yeah. It's like, it's, let me stop this. Yes, so that piece is one of the few pieces that was wholly, had to be puppetry. But that being said, I think that if you can push yourself to still try to achieve that, for example, like there are other pieces that I've done, like the David and Goliath piece, that could have been done in animation. But I was also making an homage to bunraku puppetry, traditional Japanese bunraku puppetry. So that, yeah, that same story could have been done in animation, but it wouldn't have been an homage to bunraku puppetry. And there's always these other elements that even the most puppety version of anything, you could probably do it in animation or in some other version. But the fact that it is live, the fact that it is being done in front of you in a tactile way means that it could have only been done in puppetry. So yeah, it's more of an abstract concept that you just keep pushing and keep asking yourself.
Yeah, especially with animation, like puppetry and animation, like, obviously we get a lot of that with our films. Sometimes people kind of question whether or not, is this really classified as animation or is this puppetry? And that's a little bit harder to answer sometimes. But I think the thing that, for me, especially with this question between animation and puppetry, that I find so lively about puppets is the fact that you can actually watch the manipulation happen. That it's similar to live theater with just actors in there. You're seeing them do it. But when I'm watching animation, I'm not questioning how are they doing that or how are they making that puppet come so alive. Whereas if I'm watching puppetry, I can just be in amazement, not so much with the story that's happening with that puppet, but just how fluid that puppet can be moving to actually make me believe for a second, even though I know it's live right in front of me, that maybe it is real. And to me, that's priceless, and that's the thing that I've always loved about puppetry. That doesn't really answer your question, Brittany, or anything, but I think maybe in that question and what Raymond was talking about is almost irrelevant in the sense of why should be puppetry, but more of what does puppetry add to? What do you think about that, Raymond?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way of looking at it. What if you at least, and there, yeah, I think that you could start with the question of why puppetry, and then if you can't fully answer that question, you can ask what is puppetry adding to?
That was a really good question.
Yeah.
Anyone else? No?
Yes.
Okay.
I have a question.
One more.
Oh yes.
Sorry. I'm very inquisitive. What advice do you have for people who are writing stage direction for the first time?
So there's a couple ways you can approach this. Do you have a team of people you're working with? Okay, so this is more than just a one-person show.
Yeah.
I would say that if you have a team and you have time to experiment with blocking and where things are going, I would say keep it minimum. Keep it very minimum, and then allow your team to inform all that kind of stuff, because ultimately it's going to change. And in the context of what needs, we talk about like editing, what needs to happen. This set piece needs to change out. This character needs to enter. All that kind of stuff of like, he crosses the stage left and lifts his arms up. Like that stuff is not necessary. So I would just say, especially since you are working with a team and it's probably going to be very collaborative, just bare minimum.
Thank you.
I will say, in addition to that, if there is an element of scene description, that maybe there's a set piece that you haven't designed yet or what have you, he walks up to a tree and the tree is larger than him and it has crazy branches, all that kind of shit. So like finding those elements that need to be communicated to your team that will be important later. But other than that, just let it breathe so that they can evolve. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, Katie? Is that kind of what you were going for?
Yeah, I think I need to whittle my stuff down a lot is what that's telling me.
Okay. All right. Anybody else?
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Thank you so much for talking. It was really cool to hear about all different stuff you do. With my performance piece, I'm focusing on building puppets, but I'm sort of leaping from one world into another. I'm more familiar with armatures going into like rod puppetry building. And I was wondering if you had any advice for people who are like going into building a Muppety puppet, that sort of puppet for the first time. What's sort of like, for first time builders of traditional puppetry, what would you recommend to keep in mind as you build, if that makes sense?
I would say lean into your skill sets. So if you like armature, I assume you mean like stop motion style. Yeah. So if that's what you're doing, don't try and make a Muppet style puppet, because that has been done to death and you're not going to do it as good. And what's going to make your piece stand out is the fact that you are leaning into your specific aesthetic. So find out, like I said, what your puppet needs to do. Does it need to walk? Do you need to see it walk? if like there's been puppets that I've used that need to walk, but don't have enough people to make the legs, so I just give them a long flowing dress or gown or outfit or something like that. So you don't even need to worry about the legs moving. If the puppet is trying to pick up something, are you picking it up, or are you using your physical hand to pick it up too? So you can make these choices, but I would definitely say lean into your aesthetic and you don't have to reinvent the wheel because it's already been invented. And you're probably a lot better at that than trying to recreate something you've already seen.
Awesome. Thank you. That helps. Thank you.
Does that kind of answer? Like, are you wanting to actually make a Muppet though?
The puppet I'll be doing for like, because my piece has basically it's stop motion and live puppetry, so the puppet sort of comes out of the screen in a sense, and it's going to be sort of hidden between a block, so you're not going to see its legs. So it's a very simple rod puppet, but it's less Muppety, more just like creating a very simple like ghost sort of armature. But yeah, I definitely think what you said helps with like taking similar armature I built for stop motion, but finding a way to transfer it to the world of rod puppetry, I guess, is where I'll start.
I mean, at the end of the day, if you're like practically, if you're making an armature piece, if you had an armature puppet that you were building, instead of having the shoulders and elbows be rigid, you would basically cut the armature there, add felt fabric or tubing or something that's flexible there, and then add it there as well. And then you have more of a flexible puppet. And at which point it's your same aesthetic of being used to working with armature. You're just breaking the points of movement in different areas.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Cool.
Anyone else?
I'll ask a second question.
Yes.
Okay.
So the words around the question are, this is my second XPT piece, and on my first XPT piece, perhaps some of the feedback I got was it was a little concrete. Like I had a very clear vision, and I'm a medical provider, and like that was a part of like my clear vision, right? Was this medical knowledge that I have and sharing it with the world. This next piece is way more fun, but I still could end up being a little bit too concrete. And it sort of interested me, the idea that you came in with clear vision for some of your first pieces, and then you were like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to just make it abstract, and then people get whatever they want out of it. So I guess I was just curious to hear any more thoughts you had about that, about what tends to be successful, or any of those approaches successful. How did you go about trying to make it more abstract besides working with Wade?
Yeah, I think that it has to do with your idea of success. You know, is your idea of success, you've successfully communicated a point? Is that what you are trying to do? If not, then, because I grew up in the church, I grew up doing, like I said, church puppetry, and there's always a point to it, you know. There's something that you were literally trying to preach or teach. And so your level of abstract metaphor or just experimentation is very limited, to the point that you cannot go far enough to where people don't understand what you're trying to communicate. So, and that's a personal choice that you have to make. And there may be certain elements, there may be one thing that you are trying to communicate to the audience, and everything else is open for interpretation. And if that's, and if it is just one thing, what is the importance to you in that one thing? If somebody watches that piece, thoroughly enjoyed themselves, and still didn't get that one thing that you were trying to communicate, is that a personal success for you? If all of those things are mushy and malleable, then you do have an opportunity to throw a little more shit on the wall and see what sticks. Then you can really play around with your own, this is just what I liked kind of aesthetic. But if you are trying to communicate a handful of ideas, then you're just going to have to play around with it, because, and that's what I'm talking about, the previews. Like if you go at the end of the previews and like nobody got what you were saying, or throughout the rehearsal process, maybe one of the rehearsals you go to in front of Wade, that can be something that you are asking him. And it was like at the end of your performance in front of Wade, it was like, is X being communicated properly? He was like, I did not get that at all. Then you can take a step back. But if that's not a factor in this space, then have at it. Cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Because especially with the piece that you're working on right now, which doesn't have much dialogue, you're having people mainly improvise with what they're doing. Because normally what I would say is that, you know, you take your script and you start taking lines of dialogue out. That's usually an easy way to kind of play around with ideas and try to make things a little bit more abstract. Because usually when someone writes down the original idea, you can get really concrete because there's an idea you want to get out of it. But it doesn't leave as much room for an audience to put themselves into it because it's such a personal thing to you. Like for instance, so I did a piece of, that kind of surrounded my father's death. And so when I originally wrote that script for this performance piece, you know, it was flooding back memories of times I spent with him and things that I wanted to kind of put out there. But that was, and there's nothing wrong with that, but those are my memories. No one else has attachment to those. So it was luckily the person I was working on it with that basically said, I think you're getting too personal with this. And luckily I listened to him and I was able to kind of go back to the script and I just started omitting some things. There were specific things that I wanted to make sure that my memory of those happenings were still there and they stayed there, but I still wanted to leave leeway for people to kind of put their own attachment to it.
In contrast, Wade and I did a piece that was very personal for me about my grandmother. And it was kind of comical, but it was mostly my exploration into my perceptions of my grandmother, and then also thinking about why she did certain things that she did, and whether or not I was being fair in my perception of her as a person and all that kind of stuff. So it was very, very personal. And I don't think that there was much that there wasn't a lot of room for interpretation, I think, in that piece. But it was more of just a conversation about, this is what the piece was called My Grandmother Killed a Man with Sex, because my grandmother had a lot of boyfriends and was married a bunch of times, and one of the guys died in the bedroom. And it starts off in this very like provocative idea, and then it kind of goes back and starts to track why she was the way she was. And some of it had to do with, it was the 60s and trying to raise a family, and some of these men were providing for her and all these kinds of things. And so like, and so it was more of just like these almost stream of consciousness thoughts about these things. And hopefully we took the audience on a journey that I went on, which was, this is a crazy provocative thing, but also there's logic to the ways that this could have happened, you know? So yeah, there's just there's a lot of different ways. And so for me, like that piece specifically, like the success or failure of that piece was less about like, it was more how you felt. For me, the success of that piece was how you felt about my grandmother at the end of it. If you had a better understanding of who that person was, or what that person might be at the end of it, versus how you first see her as like being a loose woman, you know, then that was a success for me. If you came out of it and still thought that it was just this silly thing about this woman who slept around, then I would probably think that that was a failure for me. I don't know if Wade, that's interesting too, because that was obviously we worked on that very closely together in a couple different iterations. It's a personal piece for me, but obviously not a personal piece for Wade. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I think because it was such a kind of a personal piece for you, for me, working on that piece, it was more about worrying about how the story was being told and what visuals best went with what you were trying to say.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Any other questions? I think we got room for like one or two more. Anybody?
Rachel.
Hi, I am sorry I'm late. I was coming from work, but I was listening in the car. Hey Raymond, hi. So good
Hi.
to see you.
Good to see you too.
Oh man. So I'm also doing a piece about my grandmother. And she's not in it though. It's a sort of a it's so interesting to hear you guys talk about doing these deeply personal pieces, but it's sort of a folk story that I wrote when she was dying, and it doesn't have me in it and it doesn't have her in it, but I always, I don't know, I always write stories that are about me that have no characters from my life in them, if that makes sense. But I'm really struggling with making, because it wasn't originally supposed to be a puppet piece, I'm really struggling with finding the imagery to put into the puppet show, taking the word and making it image, if that makes sense. Because there is some dialogue in it, and there are lots of thoughts. So for example, there's a moment where she like sees her reflection, this character, and she doesn't recognize herself. And a friend of mine was like, hey, what if you put a physical representation of an unrecognizable self, right? Like a shadow puppet version of her that she sees, or like, and I was like, that's great. I want more of that, more visual representation of how to make the word visual, I guess. And like the Netflix summary of it is that it's a character that experiences a trauma, like her home and her family are gone, like her home is destroyed. And so I'm talking a lot, I'm so sorry. I'm trying to get to the question. What's left of her home after like this big trauma, it's war or destruction or something that takes her family, is like the facade of her house, like the front door and some windows and things like that. And so she decides that she's going to protect what she has left, and she plants her feet and she protects it. And she stands there so long that she begins to sink into the ground, and then slowly the earth swallows her up until she's nothing but like a head. And she's there so long that the circus comes to town and like makes a sideshow out of her. And like people come far and wide to see like the sinking woman. And in the end, she sees her own reflection and is like, how did I let things get this bad? What have I become? And then she like bursts out of the ground and grows wings or something. And I'm struggling with story a lot, but how do you turn like sort of your poetry into image? Do you have
I'm gonna let Raymond answer this, but I just want to say really quickly, Rachel, and that is the fact that you describing it already put all the visuals in my head.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was like watching a film and everything. So I think you have it. What you're looking for. Like if you didn't have any dialogue to tell me what was happening, and you just kind of went chronologically with what you described, I'm there for you. I'm trying to figure it out exactly what you're trying to say if I didn't know the story behind it. But I'm already there. This idea of seeing feet and then sinking into the ground, and then a circus come up and stuff. Anyways, I don't think you're as far off as you think you are, but I'm going to let Raymond take over. Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I was going to echo that. I think that it's a really interesting story, and there are interesting visuals there. I think that you may be fixating on the semantics of visuals, like the idea of adding a bunch of other random shit that's happening around her, or like having any more narrative within that visually. But like, that's a straight narrative that has an interpretation that can be open, and you can decide if you are going to articulate that in any dialogue. But I would agree with Wade. I would suggest just playing out the scene and seeing if, and it might be a thing where you put in front of Wade and be like, okay, this, then you decide what is important that I need to communicate. You know, what I really think it's important that they understand that the reason she's sinking is because she is being stubborn. If that's an important element to you, then you can, and that's not being communicated well enough visually, then you can add something to accentuate that, whether it be dialogue or some sort of additional visuals on top of that. But as far as what you just described, it made perfect sense, and it was interesting. So I would just say, try and lean into the nonverbal, and then just sprinkle in the verbal on the elements that you think are most important for you.
Okay.
And then if there is a need, if you feel like it's just too fucking boring to watch this puppet stand there and wander around, then you can think about, like, you know, there's a bird that lands on her shoulder, and that's a sense of like she's stuck in the ground, and yet this bird has the freedom of flight and is building a nest in her head and all this kind of stuff. You know, what is the metaphor and visuals on top of that? So if you are looking for other beats to add visuals to it, I would say don't saturate. I still think that what you're saying is interesting enough, and you can have just a handful of additional images like the mirror that you sprinkle along, but I would say don't saturate.
Okay. Is it, I'm thinking of making sort of the higher brow sort of thought or images or like poetry, just projecting words, also just important bits. But I do
you have any narration in the script so far?
So I have a script written, and it is like written as if someone's going to like walk on stage and tell a story. So it's like, and then she said blah 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 blah, and then narration, and then as if sort of that's how it's written, like in paragraph prose form. And I'm trying to sort of, because it wasn't going to be a puppet show at first, like I'm trying to sort of cut lines of narration and say like, this narration is now the image of this, or and then like, or this dialogue is now a gesture instead of like a sentence this character speaks, because it's kind of like a moving picture book. It's like a giant cranky. I built the world's largest giant cranky. It's ridiculous. It's like 8 feet long. We'll see. But and it's like she's a tabletop puppet that's sinking in front of it, and then all the other characters, the background, everything else is shadow and cranky background changing. I don't know if I answered your question.
No,
I'm sorry.
yeah, that makes sense. The written word is, this is artist subjective, and this is my, like, just the way that I view these things. So take it with what you see, with however you want. But I think that the written word on screen is a bit of a, it's too much. and I think, and in my aesthetic opinion, like actually saying it, having it written out as to what the thing is, if it is a sense of like a line of poetry that is a verse or something like that, that is supposed to accentuate or put a little spice on what you're saying, then yeah. But like if it is a straight piece that is supposed to be add narrative context, and to be honest, you may get to the point, because this is an experiment, where you might have to put this is what this means, and that's okay. I would just say, if I were doing this myself, I would do as much as possible not to need that, and have that be my backup plan, having the written word on screen. If that makes sense.
Yeah.
To confuse you further, I would say that to say that since you are kind of working with this kind of fold-out book format idea that you want to do with the story, that it can work in the sense that, like, I remember this piece that I saw at the center. I cannot remember the name of it for the life of me. It was such a beautiful piece, though. It was about fire. But anyways, it started off with a person at the typewriter. And so as they were typing on the scrim, they had what the person was typing. And so that came a part of the story and how the story was told. They used it sparingly. They didn't use it all the time. And most of that the show was silent from what I can remember, except for sound effects and whatnot. But yeah, it felt like in that instance, because they had this whole typewriter thing, it felt like, the person was thinking of the story, typing it out, and then you were seeing it come alive all at the same time. And it was just gorgeous the way it happened.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Did you know?
I would. Yeah, that's
what
what I
piece I'm
don't
talking
want
about?
to, like,
That was a hell of a show.
That was a beautiful show.
It was incredible.
Gorgeous. One of my
And I think that
favorite
helped a
shows.
lot. The typewriting sort of took over this character's life in that show. So the interaction between the character and the text was really important. It wasn't just one-sided.
Yeah.
So I feel like having a more complex relationship between the text you're presenting and the audience and or the character adds, it takes it from being you need additional information to understand the context, and makes it into a thing that accents the story and makes it better.
Yeah, I guess that's a really good example of that. Yeah, my point was just saying that if it's just a blurb about exposition, then that's a little more clunky. But if you can interweave it from the beginning throughout, and like have that be a point, even if it's just like it's on the shadow screen, your handwriting writing on the shadow screen. Maybe it's like cursive, and you're like wisps of air, and then it comes together, and you're like drawing it out and all that kind of stuff. Something interesting like that, I think, it can be helpful in that space.
How do I do that, Raymond? That sounds great.
So easiest way to do that would be, there's two ways to do it. You could do overhead projector, just a piece of clear plastic and just writing on that. Or you can use any kind of marker or paint, maybe a paintbrush or something like that on top of that. You could do it in the opposite way, where you have a big screen or what have you, and then you just have the light, and then the hand comes in front of the light, and you're writing on the actual screen. In that case, you have to draw a little bit bigger, and you have to go through multiple screens, unless it's like butcher paper or something like that. The easiest way would be to do it with overhead.
Okay, that's so cool.
Yeah, and then what's great about that is the overhead you can pour water on it, and that like makes the words go away, or you can blow it off the thing and sprinkle glitter on top of it. All this other kind of stuff with the overhead to like really accentuate that kind of stuff.
Okay.
And if you establish that aesthetic throughout, that you're
Yeah.
using this overhead and incorporate, and maybe your hand becomes, maybe you're using a shadow, your hands are doing a shadow puppet, and then your pen comes in and like becomes a part of that shadow puppet and starts writing on it. So just experiment with that kind of stuff.
Okay.
But I will say that
Cool.
use it in the context of like, even that as a potent spice, you know, it's easy to get seduced by something cool factor that you just put it throughout, and then the whole point of the story gets lost. Because it is a cool, like I said, you just described it, and that sounds really fucking cool. So I hate for these other things that we're talking about overload the basic idea.
Yeah, it's a thing as artists that we always are battling against, and that is aesthetically what to keep in and what to keep out. You know, I'm a huge fan of Project Runway. I've loved that show for so long now, and then one of the reasons I love it is because of that's pretty much the entire show. It's the idea of what that designer keeps on the form versus what they take off the form, or vice versa, to make that perfect garment. Anyways, I hope that helps.
All of that helps. Those are really beautiful ideas. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, can't wait to see the piece. I can't wait to see everybody's piece. I'm very excited about XPT being in person, being able to see people live. This is going to be a really good one. So,
unless someone's got a really quick question, I'm going to let Raymond go for a second. Anybody else got one more quick question? No, great. Raymond, thank you so much from myself and everyone else involved. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it. If you don't mind staying on for a second while everyone gets off, and then we'll just talk.
yeah. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye.
Thank you,
Bye.
Raymond.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Wayne.
Thank you.
Now that they're gone, turn off the light. Hey, buddy.
Hey, buddy. Thanks so much for doing that. I really appreciate it. I hope
Yeah,
it
it
wasn't
wasn't-
too big of a problem for you.
No, it wasn't nearly as painful as I thought.
Good. Good. You know what? I'm gonna